Salford, part of the great metropolis of Manchester. As the epicentre of the Industrial Revolution, it was here that a phrase was coined that survived to this day. What happens in Manchester today happens in the rest of the world tomorrow. So listen up, rest of the world. Tomorrow's going to drizzle. In 1485, Manchester figured heavily in the Wars of the Roses. Eventually, the dynasties known as the House of Lancaster and the House of York were united by Henry VII, who combined both into the House of Fraser. Peace reigned here until the Civil War, when royalist troops under Prince Rupert used the city as a base from which to attack nearby towns. He ordered the sacking of Bolton, when the entire town was reduced to a miserable pile of rubble. Later, funds were provided for reconstruction, and work is expected to start soon. The Manchester we recognise today only really appeared with the Industrial Revolution, when the city's population was housed in overcrowded slum dwellings. However, sanitary conditions were improved when pipelines were constructed to bring fresh water from the Lake District. These worked well until the 1960s, when one resident ran a bath and discovered Donald Campbell in it. Throughout the 19th century, inventors devised many industrial machines here. There were Arkwright's cotton frame and Hargreaves' 8-spindled jenny, and workers were later amazed by Crompton's spinning mule, possibly one of the cruelest circus acts of the age. The industrial labour movement was born in Manchester, eventually growing into the Trades Union Congress. So successful was the TUC that it was once honoured by having a cheese biscuit named after it. The pioneering feminist Emmeline Pankhurst was born in Manchester. Starting in 1910, Pankhurst campaigned noisily for women's rights outside Parliament every day from 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She would have got there earlier, but she always had a stack of ironing to get through first. Another noted Mancunian was the businessman and philanthropist Jonathan Didcot. On retiring, he sold his business here and left to tend to the poor and homeless in Liverpool, where his good work was said to be tireless, just like his car. The most famous name associated with Salford is artist L.S. Lowry. A number of his famous matchstick paintings are displayed here in the Lowry Centre. Approximate contents, 49.
Join us this week in the fine city of Wolverhampton, quite literally the home of loads of people. The name Wolverhampton is derived from Wulfrun, the Anglo-Saxon noblewoman who was granted a land charter in 985 AD by King Ethelred the Unready. Wulfrun was summoned to the king's palace for the charter ceremony to be greeted by Ethelred the Unready, who answered the door dripping wet in a bath towel. He then tried to sell her some of his own brand torch batteries. Public transport came to the town in 1847 with the opening of the Wolverhampton Corporation omnibus service. This served the city centre and then expanded to the suburbs with stops positioned at every mile. Making the journey by bus today, very few of these original cast-iron Victorian bus stops can still be seen, as most of them have been destroyed by vandals, really. Where do these people get off? In Victorian times, Wolverhampton's engravers turned their hands to producing tools to make books and signs for the blind. They have a small museum which includes the least successful sign ever made in Braille. It reads, "Danger, do not touch." Born here in 1930, John Keith Taylor, OBE, was the football referee famous for officiating in the 1974 World Cup final, during which he awarded 2 penalties in the first half an hour. Sadly, his career ended soon after when he suffered a blow to the head, which caused his eyesight to come back. In 2003, the illusionist David Blaine previewed his glass container stunt suspended high above the Wolfram shopping centre for 42 days. When he came down, having done nothing in a box for 7 weeks in a row, he was signed as a striker for Aston Villa. The record producer, Pete Waterman, is from Wolverhampton. He left school at 15, never having learnt to read or write. He went on to produce records for Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan, which he described as making pop music more relevant. So he left school never having learnt to hear either. In the 1950s, the future record producer Phil Spector lodged here when he was an exchange student at Wolverhampton College of Art. Where he got his musical influences remains a mystery, according to his landlady, Mrs. Doodlang Doodlang. In the world of record production, Spector is widely regarded as a genius. That word is bandied about far too much these days. But not tonight. Wolverhampton has won the annual English Heritage Most Beautiful City Award not once, not twice, not 3 times, obviously. Wolverhampton's first railway station... Wolverhampton's first railway station was at Wednesfield Heath, about a mile from the city centre. It was opened in 1837 but was demolished in 1965. As a mark of respect, all London Midland trains coming into the town still stop there for 20 minutes. Michael Marks and Thomas Spencer founded their first clothing factory in Wolverhampton in 1898 to supply their growing chain of M&S retail shops. When the 2 men collaborated on the design of a revolutionary new pair of underpants with a loose-seamed fly to rival the traditional Y-front, they soon fell out. Wolverhampton's West Park was designed by the Victorian nurseryman and landscape architect Richard Hartland and opened on the 6th of June 1881. On that day, in 1981, the council celebrated the centenary of West Park with a cheese and wino party. Educated at Wolverhampton Grammar School, Sir David Wright is the former diplomat who served in China and Korea and as British ambassador to Japan. It was his job to host visits by the Duke of Edinburgh, who he managed to prevent saying anything inappropriate. The Duke explained that Sir David convinced him that doing funny foreign voices was no longer politically correct. In 1967, Enoch Powell, the city's MP, delivered his Rivers of Blood speech that remains one of the most infamous pieces of oratory in modern history. Powell always protested he was misquoted. What he actually said was, "I am filled with foreboding and dread. I see the streets foaming with much blood, but we've had a lovely day, so now let's toast the bridesmaids." The Wolverhampton Phobia Research Facility pioneered cognitive behavioural therapy. This month's Lancet published details of their treatment of a local man who suffered a severe morbid fear of crowds. The doctor gave him a West Bromwich Albion season ticket. But he's not alone in going somewhere, not expecting a crowd to turn up. Fine town of Colchester on the south coast of Devon. We really should get a better sat-nav. In 1759, there was an attempt to land a French invasion force along the coast near here at Malden, which was intended to support Bonnie Prince Charlie's Jacobite rebellion for control of the cream cracker market. However, the fleet became lost in thick fog and drifted along the coast, almost running aground at Frinton. The French force only realised where they were when they spotted 2 children building a sandcastle and immediately surrendered to them. Colchester is home to the Essex Council Road Planning Department. However, the department is to be closed down after it was discovered they've been planning Essex roads. This year, Colchester's Best Citizen Award went to Alan Wilson for services to the town. In his spare time, Alan operated a children's crossing, did gardening for pensioners, and ran errands for the housebound. Sadly, he's now unemployed after he gave up his seat to a blind man and was sacked from his job as an Arriva bus driver. Colchester's MP is the Conservative William Quince, who campaigned for Britain to leave the EU and has successfully introduced immigration controls at Essex ports based on the Australian system. The first shipload of convicts arrives next month. But Essex ports aren't the only places that may wish to restrict who they let in. In the city of Liverpool, the city we see today was built on trade with the New World. In 1857, Henry Tate started to import and refine sugar in Liverpool. Having amassed his first £1 million, Tate treated himself to a beautiful yacht, which, when not cruising the French Riviera, he moored on the Mersey next to his factory. As his workers gazed in awe, Tate encouraged them to work hard, explaining that if they toiled 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever taking holidays, in a few years, he'd have a bigger yacht. Tate's financial success lay in selling sugar in previously unimagined quantities. After 30 years of trading in Liverpool, he'd given the city's people a fine library, an art gallery, and type 2 diabetes. In the early 20th century, Liverpool thrived as the home of the great transatlantic shipping lines. At the industry's peak, it was said that 15% of the population worked for Cunard. The rest didn't work very hard at all. That one shipping line joke of the year, 1907. In tandem with the shipping industry, marine salvage companies grew here, and they funded the development of diving techniques by the scuba pioneer George Williamson. It was Williamson who worked out why it's better to fall backwards off the side of the boat. He found that if he fell forwards, he always ended up back in the boat. As the Great Depression hit Britain's industry in the 1930s, unemployment in Liverpool soared, and thousands living in tiny terraced slum houses found themselves unable to pay their rent. Facing eviction, they barricaded doors and fought pitched battles with their landlord's bailiffs. Radio 4 listeners will naturally sympathise. It can be a real pain trying to get rid of awkward tenants. With more than 1,500 animals in 32 acres, Liverpool's Knowsley Zoological Park is a world leader in the field of animal research and is particularly proud of its work in primate sociology. For hundreds of years, it was a common belief that apes can actually speak just like us, but only choose to do so when we're not there. A bit like the French. Liverpool's most famous sons must be the Beatles. When the Beatles returned here to perform in 1963, fans pelted them with jelly babies after George Harrison had said he liked them. We understand that Justin Bieber is quite partial to urine-filled condoms. The original Beatles drummer, Pete Best, was replaced by the band just weeks before their first UK single was released. Best became a civil servant and went to work at Garston Job Centre as a careers advisor, eventually rising to be head of irony. On the Beatles' earlier recordings, the drums were played by a session musician called Andy White, who was paid a daily fee of 10 shillings. For those who don't understand pre-decimal currency, that's equivalent to 10.0 shillings. The equivalent of 50 pence a day doesn't seem much, but in those days you could go into a department store with a couple of quid in your pocket and come out with a new wristwatch, a fine pair of shoes and some silk shirts and still have enough left for your taxi home. Of course, CCTV put a stop to that. In 1966, after John Lennon remarked that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, their records were burnt, their concerts picketed, and they stopped touring forever.